2:14 p.m., courtroom number 3. It was raining. Heavy raindrops tapped evenly against the window pane, like the persistent whispers of a truth long buried. Oakwood, a small town nestled between ancient trees, its peaceful exterior seemingly detached from the storms of the world. But beneath that serene shell were cracks smoldering, cracks of prejudice, division, and the fear of difference. Despite being a multi-ethnic community, Oakwood had never truly escaped the shadow of the past. The Black and Latino communities, though rooted here for generations, still had to struggle against suspicious glances, doors of opportunity that were barely ajar, and a justice system not designed for them. In a place where justice was supposed to reign, truth was often distorted by the color of one's skin. The police, those who were supposed to be the shield of protection, sometimes became the hidden threat. Thus, though injustices occurred every day, few had the courage to speak out. Until today. A 3-year-old black boy sat in his mother's lap, small, seemingly invisible in the room, heavy with tension. He didn't cry, didn't speak. His short legs dangled in the air, floating like the mood of the adults around him. But his eyes, oh, those eyes, never stood still. They scanned each face, stopping, scrutinizing as if searching for a missing piece of the puzzle. The door swung open. A group of police officers entered. The sound of boots on the wooden floor rang cold, and in that instant, Isaiah stopped breathing. His eyes widened and his small hand clenched. No one noticed, except for his mother, who could feel every tremor of her son's body. One of the group stepped forward, Thomas Reeves. He walked with a slight limp, his face chiseled like stone worn by time, eyes deep and inscrutable, hiding the winter behind his lashes. He entered with mechanical confidence, but as his gaze swept across the crowd, something made him falter. The boy's eyes, unafraid, not innocent, were locked onto him. Something was wrong. Reeves felt it, a strange, overwhelming sensation, as if he had been through this moment before, though he could not recall when. Isaiah, on the other hand, stared at him, unblinking. It was as though the boy knew something that the rest of the room was still trying to figure out. And then, like a blade slicing through the silence, he raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, pointing straight at the man. "It's him." The voice rang out, soft as a breath, but chillingly clear. The silence froze the room. Outside, the rain continued to fall, heavy, steady, like a rhythm for an indictment yet to be written. No one moved, no one breathed. In the thick atmosphere of suspicion, a whisper leaked. A black child daring to point at the police? He's just talking nonsense. But no one dared believe that. Reeves tried to keep his face impassive, but those who were perceptive could see the disarray in his eyes, the weight in his steps. As for Isaiah, 3 years old, his skin as dark and smooth as carved ebony, he sat still, but his gaze was not that of a child. There was something in those eyes that spoke of more than 3 years of life. Something deep, sharp, as if he had seen a truth no one dared face. And in that moment, the whole room began to feel it. This was not just a trial. This was the first bell awakening a conscience that had been asleep for far too long. The courtroom still pulsed with tension. Tanya Wilson, the mother, tightened her hold on her son, who sat on her lap. She leaned down, her voice trembling as she tried to stay calm. "Isaiah, don't point at people. You're mistaken." Her words weren't truly meant for Isaiah. They were a desperate plea to everyone around her, to herself, as though repeating them enough times could make the truth be denied, could turn back the clock. But Isaiah still stared at the man, Officer Thomas Reeves, with a cold gaze that was strange for a 3-year-old. It was the gaze of someone who had once known fear. In one corner of the room, Prosecutor Lena Hayes stood still. No one spoke to her, and she didn't speak. But Hayes' sharp eyes had not left Reeves since Isaiah had spoken. She could feel it clearly. This was not the usual response from a police officer accused without cause. This was the reaction of someone familiar with guilt. Reeves, dressed in his neat uniform with his shiny badge, was supposed to embody trust and order. But now his usual confidence had drained away. From the corner of her eye, Hayes caught the slight tremor in his hand, the awkwardness in his breathing. Gone was the pride of a seasoned officer, replaced by the fear now plainly showing. She wondered, how could a 3-year-old point at a man without a reason? It might have been a coincidence, but Hayes's instincts, honed through countless trials, told her otherwise. Reeves felt the room closing in around him. Every gaze directed at him felt like a knife. Old images, innocent faces, cries left unheard, reports edited, all came rushing back. The secrets he thought he had buried. And then, out of nowhere, a child, a glance, a fragile voice, and everything he tried to bury was now bubbling up to the surface. He scanned the room for an escape, but all he saw were cold faces. The trembling started to become uncontrollable. The small hand movements, subtle, but not unnoticed by Hayes. She turned her gaze to Tanya, the single mother, only 28, her face a mix of hardness and exhaustion, and knew there was something very wrong here. "We need to investigate Reeves more thoroughly," Hayes whispered to herself, her mind preparing for the storm to come. Isaiah, in the innocence of a child, wore an unusually mature look. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he felt it. Something was very wrong with that man. His voice rose again. "It's him, Mom. The bad one. From Grandma's house." Once more the silence was torn apart. Words that seemed meaningless struck deep into the hearts of those present, especially Reeves. His face turned pale, his jaw clenched. His eyes, confused, seemed suffocated by the whispers filling the room. A few murmurs rose, sly as poison. "He's just a black child. He's just talking nonsense. Kids like that don't know anything. Don't let him ruin the trial." But there were also other looks, silent, intent, those who sensed this wasn't a coincidence. Tanya tried to calm her son. She stammered, almost whispering, "Shh, Isaiah. Don't point at people, my love." She didn't know if she was speaking to her son, to the judge, or to herself. But Isaiah wouldn't stop. And when the boy repeated the accusation, this time adding Grandma's house, a real memory creeping into his young mind, the whole room seemed to sink. Judge Wilson, known for his no-nonsense demeanor, slammed his gavel. "Order. The trial will proceed." But his gaze, unexpectedly, didn't stop at the case file. It fixed on Isaiah, then shifted to Reeves, who now struggled to maintain an impassive face but couldn't hide the storm inside. In the chaos of emotions, Tanya began to piece together fragmented memories. 6 months ago, a robbery, Eldridge Grove. Reeves had been there. And not just that case, but all the recent incidents involving Black and Latino individuals. She mumbled as if in a trance, "He was always there, and all the victims were people like me. Why didn't I see this sooner?" The truth began to surface, but not in a way anyone was ready to face. In the shadow of a fractured system, Prosecutor Eleanor Hayes' eyes were like a sharp blade cutting through the fog of doubt. With the instincts honed over 15 years of working in the courtroom, Hayes wasn't easily deceived. But what was happening in today's trial made her feel an unusual sense of unease. She didn't see a police officer standing before justice. She saw a secret rotting within the very machinery of law enforcement. Reeves's eyes, his rigid expression, the small, seemingly unconscious reactions, all these fragmented pieces were starting to fit together in her mind. She quietly reviewed the files, cross-checking cases in Eldridge Grove, Maple Drive, Willow End, neighborhoods with high populations of Black and Latino residents. Each time a crime occurred, Reeves was the first at the scene. Too coincidental to be a coincidence. "There's something very wrong here," she murmured, gripping her pen tightly. This system wasn't just flawed, it was concealing a crime. A brief recess. Judge Wilson banged his gavel, announcing a 10-minute break, but he couldn't hide his doubt as his gaze followed Reeves limping out of the room, as if something was about to explode. Hayes didn't waste any time. She immediately walked up to Tanya Wilson, the face of the young mother now full of confusion and suspicion. "Ms. Wilson, I need to talk. Have you and your son had any previous encounters with Officer Reeves?" Tanya hesitated, shaking her head, but then a flash of realization crossed her eyes. My mom, she lives in Eldridge Grove. Not long ago, there was a robbery nearby. I remember one of them had a limp. She and Hayes exchanged a glance. That limp was no longer a coincidence. It was a trace, a piece of the truth that could no longer be hidden. Just minutes later, federal agents appeared. They said nothing, silently standing guard at the exits. Everyone in the courtroom began to sense that something much bigger was unfolding. Reeves's phone kept ringing incessantly, as if someone outside was trying to wake him from a nightmare. But it was too late. No one had expected that the whispered voice of a 3-year-old boy would be the first spark to ignite an investigation that would reach deep into the roots of corruption. That evening, Tanya and Isaiah were summoned to Prosecutor Hayes' office. Waiting for them was Marcus Johnson, a retired investigator, but with eyes still burning, the eyes of someone who had been waiting to speak the truth. For the past 3 years, Johnson began, I've been gathering evidence on a group of officers from Oakwood. They didn't just protect order, they exploited it. Robberies targeting elderly Black and Latino people living alone. All show signs of their involvement. On the screen, a series of images flashed up. Surveillance camera photos, crime scene reports, personnel photos. At the center of it all, Reeves and 3 other officers. We know they studied the victims' routines, attacking on pension days. Then they returned as the first responders to erase all evidence. And no one suspected a thing. Tanya was frozen. The screen flashed past an image of her mother's house. Isaiah had been there. One afternoon, a face passing by, a limp figure. Johnson continued, his voice low but firm. The problem is, all the robberies were carried out by masked men. We couldn't identify anyone until Isaiah spoke up. Hayes turned to Tanya, her face pale. But how could my son recognize Reeves if he had never seen his face? Silence fell over the room. Then Marcus slowly opened a file. Inside was an audio recording from the neighbor's camera, where Reeves removed his mask when he thought no one was watching. And in one blurry corner of the image, there was Isaiah standing by the window quietly watching. The child didn't just see, he remembered, Johnson whispered. And no one, not even Reeves, ever expected a 3-year-old to have that kind of memory. From that moment on, Tanya and Isaiah's lives were never the same. Their apartment was placed under special protection. Every knock on the door made Tanya jump. Every strange noise in the night had her holding her son tight. But she also knew they couldn't step back. The truth had been spoken, and now nothing could stop it from spreading. Hayes entered, holding the phone after ending the 3rd call. She looked at Tanya, her eyes determined. Ms. Wilson, we need you. Isaiah did what an entire legal system couldn't do. He looked straight at the masked man and named him. A woman entered the room, cutting Tanya off, with a calm, understanding voice. Children at that age have the ability to pick up on details that adults often overlook, she said. I'm Dr. Amara Davis, a forensic child psychologist. Dr. Davis sat down next to Isaiah, smiling gently at him. They recognized patterns of behavior, tones of voice, special habits. Your son may have noticed something in Officer Reeves that the adults missed. But at that moment, in a dimly lit bar on the other side of town, Officer Thomas Reeves sat with 3 other men, all police officers. They all looked tense, glancing at each other with suspicion. It's just a coincidence, a child talking nonsense, Reeves argued, drinking his 3rd whiskey. The room seemed to hold its breath. Thomas, the oldest of the group, Sergeant Peterson, disagreed. You saw the feds at court today, he replied in a low voice. There's nothing to it. Hayes is just digging. And that damn Marcus Johnson was seen at the prosecutor's office today. Reeves tried to reassure himself, biting his lip. Johnson's retired. He has no authority or credibility. He's just a delusional old man, he said, trying to hide the tremor in his hand. Besides, Officer Rivera is with us. He's always been. For now, Peterson muttered. But if this gets out to the media, Reeves slammed his glass down on the table. It's just a child pointing. The word of a 3-year-old against 4 officers with medals. You think they'll believe who? That evening, Dr. Davis conducted a special session with Isaiah, using dolls and toys to help the boy describe what he had witnessed. She gently asked, "Isaiah, can you show me what the bad man did at Grandma's house?" Isaiah held a toy police officer, dragging it across the table. The boy began to reenact what he had seen with unsettling accuracy, mimicking a rough voice. "He said it like this." He changed his tone. "And he hit Grandma when she couldn't find the money fast enough." Tanya was stunned, covering her ears in horror. The child has never mentioned these details before. "We have something else we need to look at," Johnson said, his voice tinged with excitement. He rifled through the files and showed them bank account statements showing large deposits into the accounts of the 4 officers, always 2 days after the reported robberies. "The problem is, we need more than just coincidence. We need clear evidence that connects Reeves directly to the crime," Hayes said, her voice urgent. "Something the jury can't overlook." At that moment, Isaiah, who had been playing quietly in the corner, suddenly stood up. "Mom, the bad man dropped this," he said, pointing to something on the floor at Grandma's house. It was shining. The adults exchanged confused looks. "What shiny thing, sweetheart?" Tanya gently asked. "Something like this," Isaiah replied, pointing at the photo of Officer Reeves on the laptop, where the shiny badge was gleaming on his uniform. The room fell into absolute silence. No one could speak. They all understood that if Reeves's badge was found at the crime scene and had been overlooked during the investigation, this would be undeniable evidence connecting him to the robbery. "Let's suppose Reeves's badge was found at the crime scene and went missing during the official investigation," Hayes said, her voice suddenly full of urgency. "This could be the evidence that definitely connects this officer to the robbery." "Her mother's house," Hayes continued, her voice becoming even more serious. "Does she still live there? Did the police conduct a thorough search after the robbery?" "Yes, she still lives there. And no, they just did a cursory search. They said it was a routine burglary by local teens," Tanya replied, her eyes anxiously looking toward them. Hayes, Johnson, and Davis exchanged determined glances. If the badge was still there, hidden somewhere in the old woman's house, they would have the physical evidence they needed, not only to arrest Reeves, but to dismantle the entire criminal network. A network that had long exploited the vulnerabilities of Black and Latino residents, people whom the system had long abandoned. Meanwhile, no one in the group knew that Officer Rivera, the one they thought was on their side, had signed an emergency transfer order for Officer Reeves to a small police station near the Mexico border. This decision would take effect within 72 hours, enough time to destroy any ongoing investigation. What no one in the group could predict was that the small hand of Isaiah, pointing at a corrupt police officer in the courtroom, would not only bring down a few rogue officers, but also expose an entire system, a system built on racism and the exploitation of the most vulnerable. This system could no longer hide its crimes. At Tanya's mother's house, a meticulous search began at 5:30 a.m. Prosecutor Hayes had secured an emergency order signed by a federal judge, bypassing local jurisdiction, a crucial detail to prevent the Oakwood Police Department from interfering. For 2 hours, the forensic investigation team scoured every inch of the small apartment, where the thin walls seemed to hold too many secrets that the victims could not speak out about. "Nothing," Johnson sighed, the first time showing any signs of disappointment. If the badge was here, it would have been taken. They started to feel discouraged, thinking they might have to give up the search. Just then, Isaiah, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, suddenly pulled Dr. Davis's hand. "The shiny thing fell here," he said, pointing to a small gap between the old couch and the wall. "It made a sound when it fell on the ground." There it was, like undeniable evidence, the light gleaming off the silver badge, making everyone gasp in the tense silence. The quiet gasps of a few people in the room broke through the stillness, all eyes now fixed on it, as if they had found the key to solving the mystery. They used a fiber optic inspection camera to check the gap between the baseboard panels, and they found Officer Reeves' personal badge. It lay quietly in the small gap between the floor and the wall, with his initials engraved on the back. "We've got him now," Hayes whispered, her eyes lighting up with determination as she carefully picked up the badge with tweezers and placed it into a plastic bag. A feeling of both relief and tension spread across the room, as if everything was moving in the right direction. But at the same time, a new challenge had just begun. In the hours that followed, everything unfolded like a fast-paced action movie. When Prosecutor Hayes requested arrest warrants and search warrants for the homes of the 4 suspected officers, Police Chief Rivera, with a face full of hatred, was sitting in his office preparing the paperwork for Reeves' emergency transfer. "Damn kid," Rivera muttered, unaware that his secretary was listening through the slightly open door. "I've been building this plan for 10 years, and a 3-year-old can ruin it all." Sandra Pearson, his loyal secretary, who had worked for the police department for 2 decades, was always quiet and obedient. But that morning, something strange had happened. She picked up the phone, dialed a number she had saved years ago but had never dared to use, the FBI tip line. The local online newspaper, Oakwood Herald, received an anonymous tip call at 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., they had published an article questioning the sudden transfer of Officer Reeves. By 4 p.m., major media outlets began speculating about the case involving a 3-year-old child identifying a corrupt police officer. Sergeant Peterson, driving to an urgent meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, suddenly saw the first FBI vehicles blocking the entrance. He tried to turn back, but it was too late. That evening, Officer Reeves was watching the news in his apartment. A suitcase, half-packed, sat next to the door. His phone rang incessantly. Calls from Peterson, from the police union lawyer, from Police Chief Rivera. He ignored them all. "We're live from the Oakwood Police Department, where federal agents have just entered with search and arrest warrants," the reporter announced. "Sources confirm that the investigation involves a series of robberies targeting elderly residents, mostly Black and Latino." The doorbell rang. Reeves knew who was standing outside even before he opened it. The next morning, the front page of Oakwood Herald ran a photo of 4 handcuffed police officers being let out of the police station. The caption read, "The truth from the mouth of a child. Police corruption network exposed by a 3-year-old boy." A week later in federal court, Judge Martha Coleman stared at the defendants. The courtroom was packed with victims, families, reporters, and in the front row, Tanya Wilson held Isaiah on her lap. "These men swore to protect and serve," Prosecutor Hayes stated in her opening remarks. "Instead, they exploited their power to terrorize the most vulnerable in society. They targeted elderly victims, mostly Black and Latino, believing they would be easy targets, that their voices would never be heard." She paused, her eyes filled with fury as she looked at the defendants. They didn't count on the voice of a child, a voice that was impartial, fearless, and recognized the truth when it saw it. The trial lasted only 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The found badge, the bank records, the testimony of other victims who finally felt safe enough to speak out, and Isaiah's unexpected and clear testimony given in a special child-friendly room. But it wasn't just that. What transpired in court was also a deeply reflective moment on the injustice in society, where power is not blind, but exploits the weak, especially Black and Latino communities, the very ones who have been neglected for decades. This story, starting from a 3-year-old boy, had uncovered a corruption network that could no longer be hidden, igniting outrage and a sense that justice was now closer than ever. When the final verdict was read, guilty on all charges, a solemn silence filled the courtroom, as if everyone were waiting for this moment. Then from the second row, an elderly woman began to clap, first lightly, then more forcefully. Soon, the entire courtroom stood up, clapping nonstop, the applause ringing on as if trying to erase all the pain and loss that had come before. Outside the courtroom, under the incessant flash of camera lights, a reporter approached Tanya. "How does it feel knowing your son has changed an entire system?" Tanya looked toward Isaiah, who was happily playing with a small fire truck, completely unaware that he had become a symbol of justice and change. "I think that's something we all need to learn," she replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "To see the world through the eyes of a child, without prejudice, without fear, pointing at what's wrong, even when what's wrong wears a badge and a uniform." The camera turned to Isaiah, who was calmly playing. Meanwhile, in the background, the families of the victims embraced each other, many unable to hold back tears. Some held photos of elderly loved ones who would never live to see this day of justice. These were the ones who had endured brutality, ongoing discrimination, and now they could finally rest easy. From a small gesture of a child, a revolution had been born, bigger than anyone could have imagined. 6 months after the trial that shook Oakwood, the city had changed completely. What started with 2 simple words from a 3-year-old had triggered profound changes in the criminal justice system. The Isaiah program, as it was officially named, now required all investigations involving minority groups to be automatically monitored by an independent civilian committee. Live streaming from body cameras became mandatory, and a pioneering AI-based pattern detection system was implemented, capable of detecting suspicious behavior from police officers. "I never imagined my son would change the law," Tanya Wilson said at the opening ceremony of the new Community Justice Center named after Isaiah. Now working as a coordinator for a program that connects police with vulnerable communities, she has found her true path. Through the bars of a maximum security federal prison, former officer Thomas Reeves watched the opening ceremony on a small TV in the common area. His 25-year sentence seemed more weighty now as he watched Isaiah, now 4 years old, cut the ribbon with a pair of colorful plastic scissors. "Turn that off," former police chief Rivera mumbled, also serving time in the same prison. His once perfectly dyed hair now had silver strands, a small symbol of the dignity he had lost along with his criminal empire. The investigation had revealed that the network targeting elderly Black and Latino residents had existed for over a decade. More than 50 police officers were fired, and 11 were serving long prison sentences. $12 million recovered from overseas accounts was put into a compensation fund for the victims. Isaiah's case had changed everything. Prosecutor Hayes, now the Attorney General, explained in a lecture at Harvard Law School. "It forced us to realize that discrimination isn't just an individual issue, but a systemic one. When entire institutions are built on discrimination, they will fail the very people they are supposed to protect." Tanya's mother, having recovered from the trauma, became a strong advocate for elderly crime victims. Her testimony before Congress was crucial in passing the Vulnerable Community Act. Retired investigator Johnson finally received the recognition he deserved. After years of being called paranoid and difficult, he was awarded the Civilian Medal and invited to lead the Police Reform Committee. Isaiah grew up unaware of his fame. For Isaiah, police officers were no longer the frightening figures they once were. A new generation of officers was trained under strict anti-discrimination protocols. They frequently visited his school to hold educational sessions on how to communicate with the community and resolve conflicts without the use of force. "Children see truths that adults often overlook," Dr. Davis remarked in her best-selling new book on children's perception. "They aren't blinded by uniforms, status, or power. They see people for who they really are." And so, from a small, courageous moment of a child, a movement was born, teaching us all that justice, no matter how difficult, can still be seen and enacted, especially when viewed through the innocent eyes of a fearless child. On the last day of the school year, Isaiah's teacher asked each student what they dreamed of becoming when they grew up. When it was his turn, Isaiah answered without hesitation, "I want to be a judge to make sure everyone is treated fairly." The class applauded loudly, but Isaiah didn't understand why. To him, it was just the right thing to do, nothing more complicated than that. Meanwhile, the adults in the room exchanged looks of surprise, and some couldn't hide their skepticism. A small voice in the class whispered, "A Black child wants to be a judge?" The class fell silent, with a few students' eyes shifting toward Isaiah, then looking away, as if unable to imagine a Black child becoming the one to uphold justice. But Isaiah, oblivious, simply answered in his own way. 2 years had passed since the historic trial, and on one cold winter morning, Tanya received an envelope in the mail. She opened it to find a substantial compensation check along with a letter. The letter was from Sandra Pearson, the former secretary of Police Chief Rivera, who now ran a whistleblower protection program. It read, "I have stayed silent for many years, witnessing injustice out of fear. Your son has taught me that courage has no age. Sometimes it only takes 2 simple words to change the world." And he did that. Tanya set the letter down, her heart full of gratitude. But she couldn't help but remember the difficult days before, the times she faced injustice, when society had always insisted that Black people could never change anything. Once, when she tried to bring her son's case to the press, a reporter had said, "You must understand, Tanya. Don't expect too much. Black people will never get true justice. This is just a robbery and a kid talking nonsense." Those words still echoed in her mind, a painful reminder of the racism they always faced. Every time she walked through the streets of Oakwood, Tanya felt the stares of those around her, not with care or sympathy, but with mockery, indifference to what she was enduring. Looking at Isaiah, she saw her son playing in the yard with his new friend, the son of one of the retired officers now working in the community program. The children, regardless of where their families came from, played joyfully, unaware of the barriers they had already broken together. But in Tanya's heart, the feeling that black children like Isaiah would always be looked down upon in this society never ceased. They weren't just fighting against bad people, but against a system built on racial discrimination. One day, Tanya received a call from one of the victim families from the previous case. The woman on the other end of the line was crying uncontrollably. "I've lived in fear my whole life, but then I realized Isaiah did something I thought could never happen. He, Officer Reeves, attacked my mother just because she was a black woman living alone. They thought she couldn't speak up. They thought she would have no one to help her." Tanya listened, and all the emotions surged within her again. The stories of black victims, those who had no voice, no say in the justice system, they had been silenced for decades. Isaiah's words, simple but powerful, had become the voice for thousands who could not speak the truth. We cannot live in a world where only some people have the right to protect the truth. We must take back justice for those forgotten. True justice, Tanya thought, isn't just about punishing the guilty, but about creating a world where our children can grow up without fearing those who swore to protect them. Just as Isaiah had said, "I want to be a judge to make sure everyone is treated fairly." Isaiah's story reminded us that sometimes it only takes the innocence of a child to expose the hardest truths. In a world filled with the complexities of adults and broken systems, perhaps our greatest hope lies in the simplicity of truth seen through eyes that don't yet know how to look away. That truth, though hidden under layers of power, always finds its way out, just like Isaiah did. Children like him, who see no difference between people, who only look at others with pure eyes, have broken down barriers that adults could not. 6 months later, after the trial had ended, Oakwood began to gradually change. Part of that change was the introduction of the Isaiah program, which required all investigations involving minority groups to be monitored by an independent civilian committee. Images of white police officers who had caused injustice for so many years now had to face the system they had tried to manipulate. Their crimes were no longer hidden. Every time Tanya looked at Isaiah, she wondered if this world could really change. But then she remembered those hopeful days when her son pointed at the bad guys, at those in uniform who thought they could escape justice. These children with their clear eyes and fearless hearts would be the ones to lead the way, not just for the next generation, but for a society that was learning to reevaluate justice. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to watch more stories that reveal how small acts of courage can spark great change. Leave a comment if you've witnessed moments when innocence overcame corruption, and share to inspire others to find their own voice. Because truth, as we've seen, knows no age, size, or social status. The biggest changes often start with the smallest steps, taken by the tiniest yet bravest individuals.